Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Ahead of the Curve. Today, I've got Niall Thompson on the show with me from Dandelion and Burdock. Niall, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Geoffrey.
Absolutely. So, Niall, how's the weather over in the UK? So, I understand. First of all, I guess you've got two locations, right, for yourself. You're kind of half on the British side and half on the US side.
Yeah, so I'm both a US and UK resident, and I've been living in the US since 2011. Primarily, my main kind of residence is in Los Angeles, but I've been here in London since March, waiting for the world to normalize and return to some sense of activities. But yeah, I'm based in London at the moment.
Awesome. So where exactly in London are you at the moment?
I'm Southeast London in Peckham, which is a kind of a brand new area for me. I was never really that familiar with Southeast London, but it's really very pleasant. The weather at the moment in January is not ideal, especially for a Los Angeles resident like myself. But I'm getting used to it day by day. I mean, I am a born Londoner, so it's not entirely new to me.
So can you give us a little bit of insight as to what you do and what Dandelion and Burdock is?
Absolutely. So I'm managing director of Dandelion and Burdock, and we're a content creation company. And we work primarily in the live events industry, delivering content and devising creative workflows for the various live events. So whether that happens to be trade shows, theatre, experiential events, concerts, conferences, product launches, we kind of really hit a wide remit of different audience platforms to deliver content for. And I run both the London and the Los Angeles office, based at a given moment.
Niall, it seems like we got a little bit of a delay. Hopefully we can work our way through it between the audio. Things are a little choppy. Pardon? Yeah. But you also have another company as well, don't you, called Previz?
We do. So I'm the lead product designer and CEO of Previz, which is a web-based visualization platform, which originally was intended as an internal-only tool for the team at Dandelion and Burdock to plan and preview content in a real-time 3D world, so that we can showcase that content with our clients and kind of share the creative vision throughout pre-production on a project. But that tool kind of gains momentum and gains steam, and we ended up releasing it as a software product in 2017. It's a subscription-based model, and now it's open to anyone to use throughout pre-production on various shows and projects. I think what's very exciting about Previz is kind of the way it's developed, especially during the last 12 months or so, as events have kind of transitioned to being more virtual. Is Previz is now its own virtual events platform, and you can actually run virtual events directly inside Previz. So it becomes an incredibly useful, but also an extension of what it was originally designed to do.
That's really cool. So I'm imagining there's probably been a lot of work and a lot of development work that you guys have been putting into it over the course of the last year. I would say definitely since the whole pandemic kicked in.
It's enormous, and I think one of the nice things about running two businesses is that they kind of feed off each other. So, during quiet moments at Dandelion and Burdock, being in the live events industry, we'll invest a lot of time into R&D as the creative technologists that we are, but it also means that we can put more emphasis on Previz. And so you're right, we have spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in Previz in the last 12 to 14 months. And it's a lot of work because we're running a 3D engine in the browser. We're running various different videos and running them concurrently that are all being mapped to the model. So there's a lot's happening. And then there's also very basic things like, roles and permissions, which are very important to creative teams as they're working with clients with sensitive information. So Previz is kind of quite nicely encapsulating all of that into the product as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What have been some of the kind of the hurdles that you've run into as you've been kind of moving through navigating through the last 12 months?
That's a good question. I think, again, we're kind of looking at it through two different lenses, one on the content creation side and one on Previz. I think with content creation, we've been very fortunate that we were already working with real-time technology for the last 2 or 3 years or so. So we had a really good kind of basis and a really good foundation into being able to kind of pivot and adapt to how events were changing as they were moving into a more virtual space. So that wasn't necessarily a hurdle for us. We understood how to develop content for virtual worlds, and all the benefits that would offer, both creatively and technically. I think the hurdle is really on the client side. Getting them to understand, what's feasible, how much things cost, how long things should take. I think a lot of clients early on during the pandemic, as they switched to being virtual events, they thought it could be a cost mechanism. That's not always the case. And again, there's different parameters and levers you can control to make events more cost effective. But really just kind of, it came down to really educating clients and understanding, what we could do within that space to really carry a message and to develop that storytelling method. On the previz side, the hurdles are it's really just about understanding where to prioritize what we're doing. We're a very small team. Everyone wants to kind of use the platform slightly differently. It's really just about trying to be ahead of the curve and, one step ahead of everyone else, and understanding how the platform can develop and kind of meet and match, everyone's needs and desires.
I love the reference of ahead of the curve. That was one of the main reasons for the branding of the name anyway, was to use it in that context. So I appreciate the use of the word in the name.
But it's something that's always been like at the kind of the heart of the ethos of the company. We've been around for almost 15 years now, and we've really transitioned and changed from what we were originally doing as graphic designers. But it's been really important to have that kind of desire to embrace technology, to look into new things, spend a lot of time on research and development, so that we can offer our clients, that expertise, both creatively and technically, when it comes to implementing new technology in different ways of expressing yourself creatively.
Yeah, I find it's actually really interesting that you have the combined kind of technical side, where you're working on a software platform and having that insight from a software development and product development perspective, along with a content and a purely creative house. Because I've been finding there's been a lot of companies that have been sprouting up that have a combination of both a technical level and a creative level. But at the same time, there's still so many companies that are out there that are either purely creative or purely technical, and it's hard to sometimes find that balance and that combination between having the really purely the purely creative side being able to systematically work out what is going to be realistic, and what can happen in a realistic world, as opposed to a purely just brainstorming, mind dumping creative side.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's right. I think it's about getting that balance correct. And I think for us, we often say that we're at almost the bridge between, the purely kind of technical world, which is like AV installation, the actual logistics of something that's not really something that we do. We're kind of the bridge between that world and content teams. And we have a very kind of established content team in London who are working with a range of different technologies, but being able to say that we are that bridge, really helps that reassurance that we can deliver a successful event, that we understand how to talk in both languages, both the creative and technical speak. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, I've never worked with you guys directly, and I'm hoping to sometime, of course, in the near future, hopefully. But from a service perspective and what you give back to your clients, I understand that you're working right from the time that you make that connection to the client, and the client has a need creatively, but also from I guess also from a systematic side. But do you guys do everything turnkey? Do you do everything from the moment the client has an idea, and then you go all the way through to job site and execution in the live event world? Or are you guys being subcontracted for just one section or one part of the creative process?
It's a good journey to paint, because I think one of the challenges that I have as managing director is being able to effectively describe what we do, because we get asked to do a lot of different things in a lot of different audience spaces. So I think very often we'll be presented with an idea. So we'll kind of partner with a creative agency, or an advertising firm, and they've already got some kind of inkling of what they want to deliver, or the message they kind of come to us with various kind of a vision effectively, and then they'll kind of work with us to kind of figure out what is possible. So we'll go through that journey with them up until execution. We'll be on site and really kind of seeing it through. But then for other jobs, we might just be just a small section. It might just be figuring out that technical workflow, or what the content workflow might be for a different creative team. So we're really happy with that kind of model, because it allows us to work with a lot of different people at different points in that journey. But for us, obviously, we want to kind of really kind of tackle projects from start to finish, because it allows us to kind of deliver the best work that we can.
Yeah, and that's definitely definitely a very important part of it. I think the more that you can be involved in the creative journey right from the start, the client's gonna have a much better result, in the end. So I'd imagine as well, having the pre-visualization tools available in-house is also a huge asset, to be able to show the clients what they're going to be, what they can expect from both a content perspective and from a sheer design perspective for the event.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of teams are using it either just purely internally. So they'll have, an animation team who need to kind of pre-visualize things as they work through a project. And they're using it, behind closed doors to, not necessarily expose them to having to technically visualize it in a media server, for example. It's all through a web-based interface. It's very easy. It's drag and drop, and that ease of use suits a lot of content teams. But there are also teams who are using it, as you described, externally with clients for that review, that kind of approval process, to speed things up, to kind of get the best creative, and to really just keep those creatives as part of the loop, to make them feel that they're part of the process, that they're an active in a project, and they're not really kind of out of the loop, or just being presented finals. They can really kind of get a real sense of what it feels like to be in that world, and what you're going to be delivering.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking about virtual production, because of course virtual production's been a hot topic over the course of the last going on year now, which is crazy to really think about when you put it in context. It's like we've been in this now for almost a year. But thinking from a virtual production perspective, what have been some of the interesting things, or some of the exciting things that you've kind of come across in some of the workflows and the development that you've been doing over the course of the last year?
That's a good question. So kind of as live events were kind of slowing down to a halt, we really made it important to us to familiarize ourselves with different XR stages throughout London, and there are quite a few of them, just so that we could be ready to deliver projects on those stages and understand how those different teams were delivering, virtual production. Some people working in Unreal, some people working with Unity, some people working with Notch, or a combination of the three. But yeah, taking the time to familiarize ourselves with those teams and figure out exactly how they would want work delivered. And we were very fortunate. We delivered the virtual launch for the Ford Transit E-Van together with Creative Technology and Imagination, and that was in the London XR stage. We also delivered a music performance for Jax Jones at the Mars Studio, and really kind of trying to understand how different industries would also deal with virtual production. So it's been good. I think there are still things to figure out. It is still very much racing ahead with, but it's exciting, and I think it's exciting to see how it will develop in this year, because I think there was an optimism that live events would be coming back soon. and that's probably not quite the chapter that we're in at the moment across the globe. But virtual events are definitely here to stay, and I think there's exciting things happening, both in the fashion space, in the retail space, and just seeing how those different industries will adopt that technology is going to be very exciting.
I would actually love to hear what the viewers' opinions are on live events and what their feelings are about live events coming back. Niall and I were having a little pre-discussion, of course, before we hopped online here, and we were sharing some of our thoughts and our opinions of what live events might look like this year. I was mentioning to Niall that things are starting to heat up a little bit in the live events area. I know we've been having these spikes in COVID, but people are planning ahead, especially on the trade show side. We're seeing trade shows are still pushing forward as well with a lot of their plans. So it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on what that realm might look like, or what that market might look like. Let's just say a few months from now.
I think what's interesting from a human perspective is that, my world, my personal world at the moment, is very quiet. It's very kind of solitary. I think when you think about a live event, there are some live events that I've been to that will have 40,000 people. And I think just from a human perspective or an emotional perspective, I don't think that's a reality that we'll be able to jump back into so quickly. I do think it will need to be a gradual reintroduction of events. And I think people will want that exclusivity. They'll want that, that they'll want to feel like an intimate experience rather than the big stadium, the big festivals, because I think it'll be too much of a sensory overload. I think for the last 12 months or so, we've been living in these kind of, siloed, protected bubbles to ensure that we're all safe. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting just how we reimagine that live event experience.
Yeah, the thing we've been speaking about it week after week. Drew has a question. Do you find yourself having to adapt the tools available, or are you able to push for features to the developers, manufacturers to create what is needed? I think that's
a great question. Hello to you, Drew. I think it's always helpful to have a good relationship with, with the different hardware solutions that you're using. And I think, we've always done that as a company. We try and keep our friends very close because it's all mutually beneficial. But then I think as software developers, we have the power to kind of modify those tools and create our own tools. And it's something that we internally have always tried to do. We always try and set January off as an R&D phase for us as a company so that we can start to look into different technology and different solutions. But it's a great question. I think having that close relationship with different manufacturers is pretty crucial, I think, because you start to have that real world discussion with them. And, I think they want the feedback too. As a software provider ourselves, we want that feedback from our users. And, that's why we have a lot of people on our enterprise solution, because we get to develop custom features for them, which, are helpful to them, but then also end up being helpful to other users.
Yeah, absolutely. I can say the same thing on my side, of course, working in the same areas that you are, and Drew for that matter. It's really important to be able to have that feedback, and it's really important to have that connection to the users, especially to be able to make modifications and changes, especially in a world that is changing so quickly and rapidly as is now. We're seeing so much diversity and so much change, and we're looking at a tremendous amount of evolution in software development. And I know we've been touting this, week after week, but we're seeing the game engines, like Unreal and Unity. And it was funny because I'm looking back at, like when Unity was born, or not Unity, but when Unreal was born, and it was like 10 years ago. It wasn't that long ago that Epic wasn't a thing. And it's 10 years in our time. It seems long, but it's not. Like a lot of the media server companies have been around now for going on 20 years. So it's quite interesting to see how disruptive the gaming industry has actually become into our world over the course of the last I mean, maybe 2 years actually, if you really wanted to kind of get into it.
I think specifically with Epic and Unreal, I think you start to see how they're pushing into doing user interface in automobiles, and when you start to just understand what that concept really means, that you're running a game engine as the interface to your car. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but it's also kind of crazy at the same time. Just understanding the breadth at which their platform will be able to deliver content. It's exciting, and I think just going back on the last thought, I think with software and with hardware, everyone's had to kind of almost throw out the roadmap and kind of rethink things really quickly. And that's both like exciting and terrifying, because there were plans and strategies in place, I assume, from a lot of these different companies, and they've had to think very quickly on their feet. But it means that innovation is born out of that, and I think that's how technology really kind of steps to the next level. Is sometimes by kind of pressing the pedal and not thinking from scratch, but just kind of kind of appropriating how you might fit into today's market.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and coming from a product development perspective, you're always shifting your targets around quite a bit, depending on how the market's trending, what's kind of going on, what's coming up. There's a lot to kind of take into consideration when you're developing something, and it's hard to lose focus of that as well, because you can get really hyper focused on one particular item or one particular thing that's trending, and you've got to kind of keep a very broad mindset as to not only the trending items, but things that are coming and things that are moving down the road, and what the world might look like in a year or two from now, as opposed to what's happening at the present moment and what's going to be available a year from now.
And I think that time unit is really interesting. Like, a year from now feels like the world will be very different. And I think it's very hard to kind of plan and strategize for 3 months from now or 6 months from now. But a year feels, and that's my optimistic self, a year feels like, the world could actually be quite different in that time period. But it's the in-between that I think is the tricky bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that timing is always tricky. Timing, I would say, is a whole conversation that we could have amongst a huge group of people and never really have a true conclusion out of it, because we can't predict the future, and we're trying to predict the future right now. Actually, at this very moment, we're trying to predict the future, but it's always a moving target. It's something that has just so many variables, it's impossible to come to a complete conclusion. Brett was saying that currently, basically currently planning drive-through and drive-in combined with a live event during the spring. So, I think that's kind of touches on the point of these hybrid-based events, especially moving, I think, into this new year. We're probably going to start to see a lot of test bed events where people are going to be taking on different approaches and trying different things to see what works, what doesn't work, what people are comfortable with, what people are not comfortable with, moving into this new, I guess we can really kind of call it a new world, where people are starting to receive these vaccines and they're starting to feel a little bit more comfortable about getting out and getting around people. What are your thoughts, Niall?
I think specifically with the drive-through idea, there's two elements of it that I love. One, it's safe, and it's nostalgic. I think that American drive-through experience is not something that I've ever done, but it's it does kind of feel, it touches that kind of emotion, that kind of nostalgia, and I think if you can kind of create or curate an event around that nostalgia, whether you're showing old movies or whether you have certain stage performers, or even in the kind of way that you might serve food or things like that, I think it's a great kind of experience that you can create for this kind of tricky time period that we're talking about. But it's good. It's a really good example of trying to rethink what we can deliver in terms of an experience, for a live experience, for a live audience in these tricky times.
Yeah, it was really cool, actually, this past holiday season, seeing so many different companies putting on these huge light display shows, which were fully drive through. I mean, they've always kind of been around, and they've been in different areas, but there were a lot more of them, certainly a lot more of them this year, and there was a lot more traffic during some of those as well. We actually had the benefit of attending it wasn't a drive-through, but it was a light show that was put on at one of the botanical gardens here in Orlando during the holidays, and it was really cool to be able to walk through a beautiful garden, a beautiful part of nature, but also have all these little trinkles of technology sprinkled throughout it and illuminating different parts of the nature, and the beauty around it, but also just having something that you can experience during the time and experience it with the family in a different kind of way than you would going to a concert or something along those lines. So Brett was asking with previz. Sorry, Niall. I was just going to say, Brett was asking with previz, do you have a client collaboration tool of choice, especially when it comes to working with game engines? And that's a great question, Brett.
So previz is its own platform. It is running a 3D engine in the browser itself. I think the subtext
WebGL based, Niall.
Yeah, it's a WebGL based program. But I think it does kind of touch the subtext of the question, which could be, how do we kind of capture real-time content into the browser? So typically the way somebody might use previz is they have a pre-rendered video that they are then mapping to a model. But that's a certain type of workflow, and I think we are seeing the advent of real-time content generation, and we're certainly doing it for most of the work that we're doing at Dandelion and Burdock. So the subtext of the question could almost be, how do we kind of capture output from a game engine into a web browser? And it's a good question, and something that we're currently investigating. And the simplest solution might just be to capture an NDI stream into the browser and map that, and that's a completely sensible way of doing it. But in terms of content tools, we're pretty agnostic, because I think they all have their different merits. And projects with Unity, Touch Designer, Notch, Unreal, and we're trying not really to stay to one or the other, just because I think there's benefits in understanding all the different platforms and what they can offer.
Yeah, I think that also touches upon picking the right tool for the right job. There's so many that have a lot of similarities. The one thing that I've always found really interesting about rendering engines is they all render a little bit differently. And it's amazing because the technologies are the same, but of course code is different. Some of the algorithms, of course, that generated are different, or the shader code is different. And I've always been able to sense and see kind of subtleties in the rendering techniques from one engine to another. And it's really kind of fun and interesting to be able to see those. But I think it's also what attaches us to even selecting some of the tools and the tool sets that we use to create content and create media. And the collaboration tools are really an interesting point all in itself, because there's a lot of the platforms inherently are building collaboration engines or collaborative tools directly inside of them. So, Unreal's always had kind of a collaborative pipeline that's been in there, and Unity as well has had some collaborative pipelines as well to be able to work in there in those spaces. But it's interesting to also see a lot of these new web tools and web interfaces popping up, and it's going to be, I think, really kind of revolutionary to see what's going to kind of come out of some of the tools that are being localized. And then there's also, I mean, if we really wanted to kind of get into it, we could start talking about virtualized platforms and virtualization, which is, really kind of trugging down the tracks at a pretty high speed, being able to virtualize a lot of different things and being able to run a lot of applications that you wouldn't typically be able to run local or inside the cloud. You're now being able to do that. So it's a pretty exciting time as far as, I think, creative tool sets go, and even accessibility to those tools are becoming more and more reasonable, and the traditional ways of doing things are changing quite a bit?
I mean, it's the fundamental reason why Previz is built as a web application. It is that level of accessibility and that the universal aspect of web technology. Anyone can access it through a tablet, a phone, a desktop, and that's really what it's trying to do. Previz is not trying to be super accurate with the rendering or the lighting. It's really trying to convey, a vision and share it with as many people on a project as possible during production, so that we can have all these different opinions from lighting designers, set designers, content creators, project managers, and be able to interface through that web platform.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Niall, actually, just touching on some of the creative side. So when you guys are working in your creative workflows and that sort of thing, and you're translating it, for your client deliveries in a lot of different ways, we're always, in person, one-on-one, showing some of those tools. How are you pitching those ideas and those thoughts to your clients today? Going through COVID, and it's something that's I find kind of interesting. So we haven't really touched upon it very much in being able to deliver assets and deliver things, especially when things are being rendered real time. You want to be able to show those changes and those elements. So how are you guys handling and managing that?
That's a good question. So if we're devising a content workflow, to us that's still technical. So it's fairly straightforward to still deliver assets and kind of educate clients on that. So that will, for us, mostly be delivered as an online handbook, where we're kind of showing the different content templates, different resolutions, different ways of working. And that will just be delivered as an online handbook that's accessible by the client. And then we'll also provide different content templates as well. So that's pretty straightforward. That we can do on a conference video call, kind of walk a client through that process, connect with the various teams, to help teach them how to kind of work with those templates. When it comes to creative, that's slightly more tricky, but we're operating on both sides of the Atlantic. So we have offices in LA and London, and we always have to kind of communicate both internally between those teams. So we're fairly used to finding kind of remote collaborative ways of sharing creative ideas, both internally and also with clients. We're very, very familiar working out of the office, whether it's on site or whether it's at different clients' company or their office. But it's typical things. It's mood boards, it's presentations, sketches. Big fan of pen and paper, or it's using something like Previz to kind of show a run through or a fly through of a space. But yeah, I mean, typically we'll kind of take a creative idea or a concept, kind of write it up to really kind of firm and sort the foundation for the idea. And then we'll render still style frames or still assets. And then we're going to do some nice kind of motion sketches. So it's really kind of an iterative process where we're trying to share different ideas, kind of building up to what the final creative might look like.
Now, do you have clients that are also still looking at trying to run things themselves in a real-time app? Or are you guys compiling anything, say out of Unity or Unreal as a native application to send off to the client to run locally?
I'm a big fan of kind of native builds, especially in a fixed installation scenario. So we've done a number of fixed installations that are both running web applications or real-time applications. But just the fact that you can kind of nicely encapsulate a project file for a client that's easily executable makes a lot of sense. And then I think if you want to kind of update it, or if you want to iterate or fix something, it's just as simple as kind of either remote connecting to the device and changing something, or just issuing a new build. So yeah, I mean that workflow makes a lot of sense for sure.
Cool. The other thing that I found really interesting is, there's been a lot of challenges with the number of people that have been able to be on site recently. And I know that you guys are really in a hard lockdown right now inside the UK, which I imagine is making things extremely difficult to be able to coordinate anything that's going to be in a live context right now. So I would love to hear, some of the workflows that you guys have been able to work around with people not even being able to be accessible to site on a constant basis. It would be really good to hear that. And Scott, hey, thanks for joining in. Great to have you here. Please join us again.
It's challenging. I have to say it's challenging. So we have a long-running project for a theme park in China, and we were due to go to site, and that's looking less likely at the moment, mostly because we can't, legally fly. There's a government mandated lockdown. We can't travel for work, and so then you start thinking about, well, what can we deliver remotely? What can we deliver through, remote video technology? And it's possible. It's not ideal. So I don't really know that a good solution. I think, you really want people on the ground, and it's what we're used to. I mean, we've got, a decade of experience of running and kind of being on site at these events, making sure things are going to run smoothly, and suddenly to have that kind of whipped away from you is a little tricky, because you kind of got to figure out scenarios that still make sense. I'm not sure I have a good answer. It's really about being patient and, trying to stay safe, and, trying to be as flexible as possible, because, our clients are also having to navigate these times and these chapters, and things are changing very quickly. So for us, we're a very flexible team that just want to be patient, so we can deliver the work that we're trusted to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about the whole ideology of being able to run things remote, and hearing stories and seeing people like different directors, being able to remotely be able to call cameras and things from the comfort of their living rooms, and hearing about other studios that have been doing remote VPNs onto site and remotely controlling, media servers and different devices on site, from their studios across in different countries, which I find is really interesting, because it's kind of changed the whole dynamic of how events can happen and how things can be produced. Whereas, in the traditional sense of creating a live event and an event for any magnitude of that matter, it's always been done by having a lot of people on site at the same time. And once I started to see people coming up with these creative ideas of being able to tunnel different protocols from one country to another country without really any latency through the web, and having different types of redundancies in place and that sort of thing, it's been really interesting just to see, what people have been doing and how people have been working their ways around some of these problems to be able to still accomplish like amazing results. And I know that there's always going to be a demand to have people on site to be able to, you always need to have that connection, but also need to be able to troubleshoot things. But it's just been really interesting to see how people have been resolving some of these issues and coming across some of these hurdles by just coming up with really great solutions.
I mean, I think that is the sustainable future anyway. I think, the less that we fly, the better. And I think, especially from that kind of broadcast perspective, where you might have a director who's at home kind of calling cameras, or media server operators who are dialing in, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, my wife was just saying how she loves how LinkedIn Learning has made a lot of their recordings virtual and shipping equipment to the authors' homes, providing assistance to be able to use it, and then running the whole production virtually, which we've been seeing more and more of. We spoke last week to Devin and Caitlin about that whole situation with being able to having to ship equipment to clients on site so that they can still get work done and keep people safe. Somebody from LinkedIn was.
I think that hits on something really interesting, which is just if we're thinking about reality capture, it becomes almost like a new content production method in itself, to be able to successfully capture objects and people for use in the virtual world, whether it's through e-learning, whether it's through real-time presentations, whether it's through delivering a conference or attending a trade show. This is, for us, a new content medium, being able to effectively capture that 3D rendering for kind of transmission into another medium.
Yeah, I think LiDAR is definitely going to start playing a pretty good role into that. I think moving forward, especially with LiDAR now being pretty much completely consumer available, through the use of an iPhone or something along those lines. It's going to be interesting to see, how well they do their captures and how well you'll be able to do all of that in real time, to be able to take basically volumetric data and be able to parse that back inside of an engine and be able to capture all that volumetric information, to be able, it's quite fascinating to see how that's going to come along. So I personally don't have one of those new iPhones yet because I'm kind of holding out. So I've got a little bit of a grudge against Apple at the moment, but I'm sure I'll end up caving eventually. My wife was just saying it was added a lot of real life feeling, or it has added a lot of real life feelings to many productions too. Less polished at times, but helps me feel like I'm getting to know the person on screen in a more real way, which is definitely a good point. I just want to touch on, there was a LinkedIn user that mentioned with software development now being more part of each project, like Unity, Unreal, in the industry, that I found still ill-equipped in know-how to manage software development. What is your take on the journey of the industry on software development management?
So it's definitely not something that I studied, but in that, we're obviously managing our own software. I think it's about experience. We're using all these different applications every day, and we know what works well and what doesn't. The things that annoy us as users, and trying to understand and evaluate user experience and its deep kind of connection to user interface, to make things obvious, to make things easy. It is a loaded question, but yeah, just try and take things one step at a time to be able to be flexible. And I think for us as a software development team, we're very reactive, so we can deliver things really quickly. We don't necessarily have the overhead of a large organization with many meetings or investors, so we can kind of nicely navigate the waters of software development with a fairly small user base. So some of the kind of headache, for want of a better phrase, around software development is removed from those facets of our team.
I'm just going to put in one point there, because I've been doing a lot of this recently in managing parts of software development, and I think a lot of it really comes down to a couple of things. One of the things is organization. You have to have really good organization and really good organized methods in place to be able to do it properly. Software development can become a rabbit hole very quickly, and you have to stay focused and on task to be able to accomplish things in a reasonable amount of time. So organization, I think, is key. Communication is another piece of it, where you have to be able to openly communicate amongst your team, and you have to be able to openly communicate amongst the people that are involved, whether they're clients or outside sources or contractors or whatever. But that communication has to be open, and it has to be clear, so that you can easily get things done and be able to bypass bottlenecks quickly and resolve those in a very reasonable amount of time. The other thing is education, and educating people, and educating even the software development team on what you're trying to achieve. Again, I think it comes back to the communication point, but being able to educate people is so important on so many different levels, and it's incredible to see. It's incredible to see people developing products and companies developing products without the development teams really knowing what they're ultimately developing. It sounds kind of crazy, but there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of great and very talented companies and development teams out there that don't truly understand. Like, they have an idea of what they're developing, but they don't understand the real world application of what they're developing, and that's really, really important.
I think those are great points.
Trying to skirt around that as much as I can, because I could really get into quite the rambling conversation about development and how development is done and managed. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. Well, actually, that's a lie. There is definitely wrong ways. There are definitely wrong ways, but it's a challenge. You know, it's really challenging. And the other thing too, I'm just going to ramble on about this a little bit more, is you have to be aware of the product that you're focusing on and the development cycles or use cases that you're going to build behind building those products. Because there's different methods to build short-term products, where it might be an app, you know, for a mobile device. But there's also there's a different method that you need to take into account when you're building a legacy-based product or something that's going to have a prolonged lifespan, and that has to be managed in a much different way, and it's much more complicated and hard. Like it's a harder process, but there's a lot of rewards that come from that as well.
We delivered a fixed installation project. It's a LED installation in Philadelphia, and that project is the lifespan of that project is to last for 25 years. And that's kind of just a crazy thing from a development point of view, to just understand that you need to build something that needs to kind of, you know, last the test of time. It's kind of crazy to consider, but that's what we did.
Yeah, 25 years, that's incredible. I couldn't, like, you know, it's pretty common to have a client come back to us and say they're going to run it for 10 years. I think that's pretty much the most I've ever heard, is we want this to run 10 years for a 10-year period. But 25 years, that is just, that's unimaginable. Like, I couldn't, I mean, unless you're doing something like, well, I guess we could look at examples from Disney, where Disney has definitely had attractions in place that have run for about that long, right? Would you say, like Epic and Epcot? There's been,
they update, but
yeah, they update, but I mean, wow, yeah, that's incredibly long. Well, Niall, I'd really like to thank you for coming on the show with us today. It's been great having you here. For those of you watching, you can reach out to Niall at dandelion.burdock.com. We've really just scraped the absolute surface of what they're capable of doing. Some of the events and some of the content that you have created is absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, the work that you guys do. And I would heavily advise to all of you who are watching to check them out, because they create some amazing, amazing things. And yeah, my hats are definitely off to you, Niall, because I feel like you've definitely done a great job in staying ahead of the curve.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. It's been a real pleasure to be on today. I missed the funky shirt, but maybe next week.
Well, I guess it's kind of fun because it's a little bit nerdy. This says, over here, it says Global Dynamics, which is a play on Warehouse 13. Or sorry, Eureka. I keep getting Eureka and Warehouse 13 mixed up in my head. But yeah, if you ever watch their nerdy show Eureka, that's this is the logo and the sweater from the show. But otherwise, next week we've got Drew Atienza on with me. And Drew's got a tremendous amount of experience in working with media server technology and projection. So we'll be speaking a lot about his experience and his career next week. So that should be really awesome. But Niall, I just wanted to thank you again for being on the show. It's been wonderful having you with me as a guest.
Great.
And then, as I say to each and every one of you for watching, stay ahead of the curve, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for coming on.